Welcome to the fourth edition of Valley of Words in a session entitled Prince, Patron, and Patriarch. So, the subject for today is Francophonie, and we have with us His Excellency, the Ambassador of France, Emmanuel Lenain. We have His Highness Maharaja Sukhjit Singh of Kapurthala. We have Cynthia, Frederick, all lovers of France at different degrees. And the focus will be history, if I may say, because we are talking about the grandfather of His Highness. So, can we begin by, for people who are not familiar with Kapurthala or the late His Highness, if you could tell us a little bit about him so there's a context in which we talk about France, India, the Maharaja. Your Highness.
Excellence, on vous dit soyez le bienvenu à Mussoorie pour ce petit discours qu'on va avoir entre les participants pour l'histoire de mon feu grand-père. Je vous remercie infiniment pour l'honneur que vous nous accueillez ici à Mussoorie. May I now switch to English and try and cover the topic that Mr. Amannath has brought up. My late grandfather was quite a unique personage in his own right, not because he was a prince and a ruler of erstwhile princely India, of the state of Kapurthala, but for his immense span of vision, humanism, and above all, his absorption of culture and in all its forms and aesthetics, of which, of course, naturally, in his day and age, France was the epicenter of art and culture. And apart from that, if you take your mind back to the 19th century and the late part of the 18th century, all international treaties were signed in French, written in French, and the heart or the epicenter of all aesthetics was considered to be La Belle France et Paris. This was considered to be the very heart of all cultural activity and aesthetic beauty, which is absolutely true in its own way. Now, my grandfather was born in 1872, and he was installed as the ruler of Kapurthala at the very tender age of 5. He was 5 years old when his father died. So naturally, he was put under the tutelage of a Regency Council and some very, very, I would say, knowledgeable and learned British tutors were appointed to look after his education and his development. And the name that comes to mind immediately is Mr. A.R. Wood, who was his tutor. And he was known in Kapurthala as Lakri Sahib because of his name. Wood in so he's known as the Lakri Sahib. But an exceptional human being in his own right. And he quickly saw that his young charge had a remarkable talent and flair for languages and aesthetics, which Mr. Wood started encouraging him and developing him in his interest. And as it happened, Mr. Wood was also one of the first to accompany my grandfather abroad on his first trip to France in 1893, as far back as that. And that's where the love affair of my grandfather and France began. And it continued unabated right till his death in 1949. Now, he's one of the few Indian princes who ruled for well over 6 decades And he virtually knew his subjects by name, almost, at least all the important functionaries. He knew them all by name. And that only is achieved when you have a very close relationship. And in the Indian context, rulership was not just administering a lot of human beings. No, it was a Mai-Bap or a mother-father context, which had to be honored and was governed by dharma or religion. The ruler was accountable for all his deeds under his fate, whatever it be. And this is the remarkable thing about the Indian princely states, that while there might have been riots in British India between various communities, most of the states, by and large, remained always very peaceful because of the Mai-Bap or the mother-father configuration between their ruler and the subjects. They looked to him for justice, and they looked to him for approachability.
Can I ask you a question at this stage, if I might? Because is it not unusual that you have a British tutor, Mr. Wood, encouraging his interest in France? Because in the 19th century, the French and the British were not entirely friendly, and so it was. Because they were even in Pondicherry and so on, and on the seas there was an ongoing maritime war. So would it not be considered subvertive for a Maharaja with a British tutor to be encouraging a Maharaja to become Francophile, because he was called the Le Roi Francophile? So was it because our enemy's enemy is our friend? Was that the reason? And even Sukhjit Singh, when he fought the British, he had French generals and military training. So how was that reconciled? How was that seen at the end of the late 19th century, that here is a Maharaja who is under British tutelage but loves France?
Well, may I give it a slightly different perspective, if you permit? I would like to put it to you this way, that Mr. Wood realized that his young charge had a fascination with geography. And in that geographical exploitation of knowledge, I think his focus was on Europe. And it was after the first trip to Europe in 1893 that the great association developed between France, where my grandfather found his first passion of aesthetics, architecture, art, and the appreciation of the aesthetics. That's where the first cementing of this association began. I wouldn't say that Mr. Wood encouraged it, but he encouraged his love of geography. And in that, the knowledge and the association with Europe came out, and then automatically it gravitated towards France. But my grandfather was rooted entirely in Britain for his administrative performance and parameters and his knowledge and his examples. But for aesthetics,
but yet his diary notations were in French. It's still interesting that all his notes in the diary he took in the French language. Was it because it was considered more chic or superior because it was international diplomatic language? It was actually even on the motto of the British royals that, the motto is in French. Cynthia,
he actually had a natural talent for languages, and he noted that he just found French to be such, he called it la plus belle langue du monde. He found that it was such a beautiful, elegant language. He was naturally took to it. So you see his diaries, all of a sudden, they're in English for a few years, and then they're completely French. And he was fluent in the language. So when he arrived in Paris in 1893, he was able to ease into Parisian society, make numerous friends, and then he, of course, became a very well-known figure in France. And then the language opened up so many doors in his travels, as we'll discuss in a bit, because that was the language mondiale. Everyone spoke it. You know, Russia.
Yeah, just
so for a start, I say for a start, the Maharaja had very, very good taste. You know.
Apart from that, his fascination with the French language was that he considered it the most elegant language. For example, when you close a letter in France, you close it with such salutations that you cannot, they look trite in English, but in French they flow beautifully.
Yes.
Je vous prie d'accepter mes salutations les plus respectueuses. Now, what could be more graceful than that? But put it into English and it sounds trite.
Trite, yes. It does.
You have to give.
What do you have to say to this, Your Excellency? Your Excellency, maybe you should come in at this, you know, with all of us Francophones here. What is your comment? We're talking about the end of the 19th century and a Maharaja who has better taste than the others to like Paris more than London, if I might say.
I don't have much to say. I must say that I swallow your words, and I see that the Francophilie has passed for generations, and I'm amazed by your comment of my language and your taste for this language. I mean, I think in the 19th century, this sort of education was not that common, but not also, I mean, in the most educated classes, not totally unusual. I mean, in Europe, we would have tutors, and in France also, from any other country, major country of Europe, you would have, in Paris, you would have tutors coming from the UK or from Germany or from other places. I think we were living in a smaller but rather cosmopolitan society, and so I'm not totally surprised. And also given that, and that was perfectly recalled by you, Aman, the links were established between the rulers in Punjab and French officers after the Napoleonic Wars, and some of them left a very strong memory and a big imprint in history. And so I'm not totally surprised on that, but fascinated by the story you recall.
Yeah. So, Your Highness, we also know that Maharaja Jagatjit Singh represented India thrice at the League of Nations, which is kind of a singular honor. I think Bikaner also was in that league. But why would you think that he was chosen of all the Indian princes to go thrice for the League of Nations? Would you have a comment on that?
I would like to suggest it's because of his facility with the French language. He addressed the assembly on 3 occasions in French, which was quite unusual. And you mentioned His Highness of Bikaner. That is correct. So did His Highness Bhupinder Singh of Patron represent India at one of the sessions. But what is interesting is, apart from representing India thrice at the League of Nations, 26, 27, and 29, my late grandfather also represented India at the inauguration of the War Memorial erected in France at Neuve-Chapelle in 1927. There he spoke in English.
Another advantage, he had the advantage of being such a cosmopolitan person. He was a natural diplomat. The League of Nations was the forerunner to our modern UN. So he was a very gregarious, well-known figure in international society with diplomatic circles. He knew almost all of the French presidents during his time. So he was the most logical choice. And I think he really served that role to such a such a degree of excellency. And, he was the Maharaja of Kapurthala. Otherwise, he would have been a wonderful diplomat for India.
So did your grandfather meet Clemenceau when he came to India? Would you know that? Because yeah, okay, because Clemenceau came and he saw the building of New Delhi, and he said this will be the grandest ruin of all, because they were not particularly friendly with England. But what is interesting is that Lahore was called the Paris of the Orient, and Punjab was called the Paris of the Punjab. So it was actually in petite colony, within that. And well, as you know, Your Highness, well, I also have a Kapurthala connection, because my grandmother's father was the Diwan of Kapurthala for the Bahraich estates. So I know that he went to Paris and he brought rubber gloves for my grandmother to say that elegant ladies must know how to cook, but they must never have a mark on their finger, a knife mark. So raffinement was certainly something which the Maharaja spread among his courtiers and made them conscious of this fact, because Punjab is also known to be very, brute and Texas in its own way, isn't it?
And that's a lovely story. It brings me to a point that, so many people have contacted us who've read the book, who have a connection to Kapurthala. The Maharaja had so many friends across the world, and we're hearing from the descendants of these people. They want to come to Kapurthala. They want to learn more about these connections. So it's wonderful to have your story too, to include in future writings.
And
no, but what I also find sorry, go ahead.
I was about to add to your little repertoire that Kapurthala Randhir College, as it is known in the old days, and now is Nawab Jagatjit Singh College. The Randhir College was one of the first small colleges affiliated to Lahore University, Punjab University, but was the only college that taught French as a foreign language. And Lahore University was affiliated to Kapurthala for French.
Wow, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Yes. So what I find also interesting about the Maharaja, it was not just Paris-centric, but because France colonized Morocco, that he also had great interest in Moorish architecture, that he builds a mosque, a copy of a mosque in a French colony in Kapurthala with exquisite details. So can you tell us a little more about the Muslim subjects of Kapurthala and the Moorish mosque?
Well, you see, in the old days, Kapurthala was ruled by a Sikh ruler, my grandfather. It was Sikh by professed belief, and a Sikh in all its configurations. Sikhism was his belief, but he ruled over a population which is 60% Muslim. So when he built this mosque, the interesting story connected with it was that the Viceroy in 1931 asked him for an explanation as to why he had spent so much money on a place of worship. And my grandfather wrote back what I think is a classic reply and shows his secular credentials. He wrote back and said, "Your Excellency may be unaware, or it may have slipped Your Excellency's attention, that though I am a Sikh ruler, 60% of our most loyal and devoted subjects are Muslim, and the best place of worship, therefore, must be theirs." End of conversation. It never came up again. And the Viceroy inspected the mosque very clean. This mosque is a copy of the mosque the Qutbiyya Mosque in Morocco, which my grandfather visited in 1922. And he fell in love with this mosque because it's of an architectural style totally unique of its own kind. And he wanted the unique for Kapurthala. So he saw a similar replica in Paris in 1925. And then he contacted the Parisian architect who had built it, Monsieur Monteau. And he got the plans drawn up from Mr. Monteau, and he commissioned the same architectural style of mosque on a miniature scale in Kapurthala, which is still extant.
Oh, so I didn't know that the Marrakesh mosque is built by a French architect, is it? Okay.
Well,
that's very interesting.
May not have been.
I mean, or designed by
mosque.
And Monteau had worked also extensively in Bobigny, so at the hospital there, and that which is also done in that Moorish style. So it's wonderful that there's yet another French connection there in Kapurthala.
But what would be of great interest for your Excellency to note is, I think it's not entirely correct, but it's what is commonly said, like they say about Agra, that there was going to be a black Taj Mahal across the river. So they all say that Versailles was meant to be extended when the royalty ran into its problems, and the extension plans of Versailles is what the Maharaja bought and built in Kapurthala. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that, Your Highness?
Well, I think this is because my grandfather chose two Frenchmen who were Alexandre
Marcel
and Boyer. There were two partners in the architectural field who specialized in building grand structures for foreign nobility and people like that. And I cannot comment on whether it was the extension plan of Versailles which he brought in, but certainly the model of Versailles and these other French architectural models left a very strong impression on his mind. And he had them replicated in Kapurthala.
Yes, you have the Mansard towers. In the towers, you have the Mansard roofs. Also, I don't know, Your Excellency, have you visited the chateau in Mussoorie, or is it the COVID that got in the way?
I'm dying to visit the chateau, the castle. And I will be in Mussoorie for the festival, and will be glad to have the honor to visit the chateau, if it's possible. Of course, yes.
C'est nous qui sommes honorés. Excellence, vous serez toujours le bienvenu. Toujours.
Un très grand merci.
I had a great pleasure of staying there. And I remember, I think that I measured the bathroom was 35 feet long in that pink room in which I stayed. It's quite a pleasure to see the scale of the chateau. It has just 4 grand suites, and it speaks of an era. And the way it's been terraced also, I think the landscape architect must certainly have been also French. He was?
Well, he was so fascinated, enamored with the French gardens at Versailles. He loved Lenotre's landscapes. So that's what he wanted to make sure that you see this in the Jagatjit Palace, terraced gardens, embroideries, and fountains. And to a lesser degree, he had those elements recreated at the Chateau Kapurthala. But obviously, that wasn't as expansive a property. And what is also notable about the chateau, it's un petit coin de France in Mussoorie, because that structure was very much influenced by the chateaus of the Loire Valley that he visited, and especially in particular the Chateau Chaumont-sur-Loire, which was owned by his friend, the Princess de Blois. So he spent a lot of time there, and you can really see that French Renaissance style of influence there. in the chateau.
It's not entirely a petit chateau, I might say, because it does occupy a lot of space in a hill station, which has got a lot of slopes, and they've created fantastic flat areas. So, how many French dignitaries have visited it? Are there some notable names that you would like to tell us who've stayed at the chateau in Mussoorie, and also tell us what let's say an average day of the Maharaja would have been in Mussoorie when he was there?
I think, Cynthia, you'd like to speak on that.
Well, I was just going to say, we know that he had a very active social life in Mussoorie. He was a prominent figure there as well, or here rather, as well as in Paris when he wasn't traveling there. So he would host many lunches, dinners, galas at the chateau. I also want to add that he did not neglect his duties as the ruler of Kapurthala and kept his eye on managing the state. But there were also lawn parties. Back in Mussoorie, in that era, it was a different time. You had flower shows, dog shows. There were simpler pleasures in life. And you didn't come up the way we do now for a weekend. You would come up for the whole season. And so many families also came up there. Everyone knew each other. It was a different sense of community then. But the entertainments were of that era. So, and the chateau was also built for entertaining. So there was a billiard room, a ballroom, and again, the tennis court. So it was an active, very active social life, and just the type of world that has really disappeared. And actually, Your Highness can talk a little bit about what he remembers about those wonderful days in Mussoorie.
Absolutely, yes. We'd like to hear that. And about some scandals also, because you can't have France with a little France without scandals.
We didn't have a scandal point in Mussoorie like in Simla, but Mussoorie did have its little flights of fancy here and there. Quite right. It did.
And Mussoorie offered...
Now, can you narrate something of your childhood and something that you remember?
Well, there were two breweries in Mussoorie that produced some very good quality beer. And the breweries had their own little stories to tell, including a few ghost stories and things like that. So Mussoorie is not quite without its own little book of fairy tales. But nonetheless, they were simple, relatively innocent little flirtations that went on, because everywhere in the hill stations this was de rigueur as part of the hill station syndrome.
You had the Raja of Harsil there. The Raja of Harsil, who was the richest man in Asia, who had, his children made a lot of scandals in Mussoorie. I read that fascinating book about the Raja of Harsil and how he minted his own coins, and he created a lot of havoc. Yeah. And those two breweries actually sorry?
He made his fortune on timber, on the timber wealth of the hills. That's where he made
Maharaja
his
Garhwal is the one, yes, Maharaja, yes. Your Excellency, it's a pity that you've not yet been to Mussoorie or Kapurthala. Otherwise, you could have had some more contributions to make. But since we are all of us rattling on a subject of which you should be the specialist, which is France, maybe you could have some concluding words to, I don't know how much more time we are supposed to talk, actually. Is there...
Aman, let me just add. I wanted to add about Mussoorie because it's very interesting to note. You were asking about scandal, but the reason why Maharaja Jagatjit Singh came to Mussoorie and decided to build here is because he wanted to be away from the prying eyes of the viceroys. Shimla was the place to be. And he went to Shimla and he noticed that they were keeping tabs on him and his friends, the fellow Rajas of Patiala and Dolfor. So he decided
absolutely.
to restrict it. So when he came over here, he could literally let his hair down, so to speak.
Okay. So, Your Excellency, is there something you'd like to say?
Well, just I want to express and I'm grateful to His Highness, to Cynthia, and also to you, Aman, for reviving this very, very powerful and very strong history. And it's a matter of pride for me to listen to you and to listen to this history. I mean, having such a Francophile, I mean, who was fascinated with French architecture to the point he built such chef-d'œuvre. I'm very eager to visit in Mussoorie, in Kapurthala, and inspired by, as you said, by castles like Versailles, like Fontainebleau, like Chaumont-sur-Loire, and many castles which are very dear to the hearts of the French people. It's magnificent and it's great. Understand also that he had a real love for passion for many aspects and very eclectic way of a French culture, and I'm sure this has contributed to expand his horizon to the point he became, as you recall us, a great diplomat and being a representative at the League of Nations and in many other fora. And I think this is really relevant and really a model for us. The collaboration he enjoyed with French architect, but it goes beyond, I think, and as you rightly put it, I mean, not just a large patron paying for buildings or for piece of art. I mean, I think it from what you say, it clearly stems that he had a deep understanding of our culture and which is for over very, very precious. For all this, I want really to thank you. I'm looking forward. I'm reading the book, and I thank also the book for publishing this wonderful book. And I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you on site now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And when you come to Tijara, actually, you know, the only hotels which are called, because in France you have the Chateau Fort, which we don't have in India. When we have palaces, we call them palace or we call it fort. But both Neemrana and Tijara are actually forts.
Chateau Fort, we used to have this, but we stopped having Chateau Fort almost 8th century ago. Huh? It's not something very new, the Chateau Fort in France.
No. So the Neemrana, which is 15th century, is called Chateau Fort because the Fort Palace is a translation from the French. So the influences continue, and we have Martan Singh's mother's pictures, in Tijara when she modeled in Paris, wearing those wonderful clothes. So I've got some Art Deco frames and some portraits, French portraits of the princesses and Maharanis of Kapurthala. So both of you, when you visit us, you'll have the pleasure of seeing a little more of France there too. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.